Funding for this podcast is provided in part by the IPM Network through the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture and by various commodity groups through checkoff dollars, including the United Soybean Board, National Corn Growers Association, and Cotton Incorporated.
The I See Dead Plants podcast shares the stories of people and plants, pests and pathogens, and the conflicts among them. Join us as we speak to the folks who attempt to solve complex problems with plants through pest management research. I See Dead Plants is an extension-based podcast created by the Crop Protection Network and the North Central Integrated Pest Management Center and hosted by Ed Zaworski.
Welcome back to the I See Dead Plants podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ed Zaworski. This is part 2 of my interview with Dr. Mark Hoddle from the University of California, Riverside. We're continuing our discussion on the South American palm weevil and some of Mark's work with biological control agents. Thanks for listening, folks. So, Mark, you mentioned, it's a great segue talking about the larvae changing into the adult that can now obviously walk around and fly and get to where it needs to get. In reading and preparing for this, I saw you guys even had like a apparatus to test the flight strength of these weevils. I guess I'll boil it down to like how do these things spread? How far can they go? And then how do you know? Because that's really interesting.
So I'll pick up on that lead. So I get asked this all the time. It doesn't matter what insect we deal with. How far can they fly?
Yeah.
And on the face of it, that seems like a really simple question to answer, doesn't it? Well, how far do they fly? But if you take the bug out to the field and you go, okay, I'm going to figure out how far this thing's going. You throw it up in the air, it takes off. It's like, where did it go? It's gone. I don't know how far it flew. It flew until I couldn't see it anymore. So one way we've figured out, and by we I mean the entomological community, is to use something called a flight mill, which is essentially an insect merry-go-round. So we can attach weevils to a rotor, and when they fly, they basically go around in circles. And if we know the length of that rotor, you know how far each revolution is. So I think if the rotor is about 6 inches long and it does one complete circle, I think that's approximately 3 feet, something like that. I'd have to go back and have a look. So you can put these weevils on these flight mills, hook them up to a laptop, which is programmed with software to basically count the number of rotations they do. And that software can also measure the speed at which they're flying. It can put a time and date stamp so you know whether they're flying during the day, flying at night. So you can get all these very interesting data from these lab-based bioassays that you're running. So you can look at, do males fly further than females? What if they're young versus old? How about mated versus unmated? How about starved versus fed? These types of things. What if the temperature's low or the temperature's high? How does that affect the flight? So all of that stuff, I admit, super artificial, probably unrealistic to anything you'd ever see in the field, but at least it gives you an idea of what they're capable of and whether or not any of the variables of interest, like sex, for example, tells you anything. Do males just fly further than females? How about an old weevil versus a young weevil? Can you glean any information from those types of studies? And yes, we've done a lot of those. And yes, they've provided really interesting insights. So for the red palm weevil, for example, we ran those flight mill studies in Saudi Arabia. They can fly a long way, maybe 25 miles in a day or more if they want to. If they want to, right?
Yeah.
We don't know if they do it in nature or not, but at least we know they had the capacity. If they chose to, they can fly a pretty long way in a 24-hour period without resting. We also know that after a long flight period like that, they lose a lot of body weight. Maybe 10 to 12% of their body has been digested to provide the energy that they need for that flight. If we feed them again, give them a few days rest, they recover some of that weight, but they never get it all back. And if they fly again, they lose more weight. You feed them again, they get some of that back, but they never get back to the level that they had previously. So each time they fly, rest and feed, it's almost like a stepping down process in the body weight in which they can recover until eventually they get to the point where they just can't fly anymore. They're still alive. So we know maybe after, I don't know, I can't remember exactly. So they can fly 8 consecutive times with a week's rest, fed everything they want. Then after that, they're done. But whether or not they do those numbers, that number of flights in nature, we got no idea.
Sure.
But at least it gives us some insight into what they're capable of. But for me, and I can't do this, I have some very smart collaborators that are amazing at doing mathematical analyses and statistical analyses on these very big and complicated data sets. But once you have those flight distances, you can fit models to them, which will give you an idea of the distribution of those data. And this was a whole area that was really interesting to me. So, for example, probably a lot of people know what the normal distribution is, right? A bell-shaped curve.
Sure.
So that means that the distances are distributed according to, the natural distribution around that mean. It has a normal distribution. Okay, so that's interesting. So the red palm weevil flight data is normally distributed. Okay, so that was interesting. So then when we did the same studies with the striped palm weevil from Indonesia, it had a dispersal pattern that was termed leptokurtic. So that's something new to me. I didn't know what on earth that meant. But what that was telling you is that the bell-shaped curve is not really bell-shaped so much. It has that general peak in the middle, but with tails. But the peak is quite high and pointy in the middle, but the tails stretch out for a really long distance. Those distribution data tell you that those weevils have individuals that are capable of super dispersals, which means that those types of insects should be particularly alarming to you, because if that is really true in nature, they may not just fly a couple of miles from the infestation point. These things may have potential to fly 50, 60, 80 miles from the infestation point. Unless you know that, you won't be prepared to keep an eye out for that type of thing. So let's get to the South American palm weevil now. So we did the same flight data. We got a curve, but this time the curve, the middle part of it was like somebody had put their hand on and sort of squashed it down. And it's kind of flat looking. And that's referred to as a platykurtic distribution, which means that those weevils, even though they're capable of flying long distances, often they choose not to. They're home bodies. They like to stick around and not move that far from the palms that they were bred on. And to me, what has been so interesting about that finding in the lab on these highly artificial insect merry-go-rounds, that is exactly what we have seen in San Diego County. That weevil has been there since about 2015. It's now 10 years later, 2025. It has spread within San Diego County, but almost at the rate of molasses. And what it's incrementally increasing its range within San Diego County. It hasn't spread like wildfire throughout Southern California like we have often seen with a lot of these invasive insects. So part of it is, I think, due to their natural dispersal being homebody-ish. And I think the other part of that is there's just so many palm trees in these urban areas that they don't even have to fly very far. So they're homebodies. They can basically just walk down to the street to the next fast food outlet and then set up camp there. There's no incentive for them to fly very far. But we know from our flight mill studies that if they chose to, yes, they certainly can fly a long way if they have to. But if they don't have to, they won't. And since there's an abundance of food and they tend to be homebodies anyway based on that platykurtic distribution where the bell-shaped curve has been squashed flat in the middle, not two things there, I think. Abundance of food and just their own predilection for not wanting to fly very far if they don't have to. Yeah. So interesting insights from really highly artificial lab studies.
That's so interesting from the standpoint of well, I mean, you already mentioned kind of with regards to the beetle from Indonesia that you guys eradicated in Southern California, how the heck does this get here? What are your thoughts? I mean, so it's capable of flying long distance if it wants to, if it has to. Have you, I'm assuming this would be really hard to know, but are there any trends with native South American palms that would kind of force the insect's hand to start to migrate or anything? Or I'm assuming still wondering. It's relatively new. What 10 years ago that it got established in California? I don't know. Does anybody know at
Yeah.
this point?
Yeah, so I think the incentive for it to fly is not overly great because the abundance of palms that I'm referring to are its highly preferred species,
Ah,
the Canary Island date palm, Phoenix canariensis. These palms, if folks have visited California and they've seen palm trees but may not know the species I'm talking about, these are the ones that are often pruned at the top and they kind of look like pineapples. You have a long trunk with a pineapple type shape at the top where all the bottom fronds have been pruned off,
gotcha.
and you just have like a cluster of green, healthy-looking fronds at the top. It's got that characteristic pineapple appearance. Those are the palms the South American palm weevil really likes. That red striped palm weevil from Indonesia went nuts on those too.
Mm.
And then that red palm weevil, it's gone crazy in the Mediterranean and parts of the Middle East because of the Canary Island date palm. It's just an extremely popular ornamental palm. But what has made that particularly lethal for the date industries is that those Canary Island date palms gives those invasive palm weevils a foothold in urban areas that are adjacent to these date production areas. So the date palm itself, economically important, is not really a great host or a preferred species for these palm weevils. But if they can get close to them and they can set up populations in these highly preferred
Oh,
palms growing in
yeah.
urban areas like the Canary Island date palm, they start hammering away at these commercial date palm plantations. So we know that once they get into those plantations and they establish in there, they can be very hard to get rid of. But again, it's like this human planting of these highly preferred varieties butting up against these commercial zones that greatly facilitate the aggressiveness or the invasion success of these weevils into these commercial plantations. So for us here in Southern California, and this was definitely true in Israel too, urban areas that have a high diversity of palms and especially a predominance of these Canary Island date palms, Phoenix canariensis, basically provide the stepping stone and then the bridgehead that these invasive palm weevils use to start threatening these commercial date production areas. So some of your listeners may have heard of Palm Springs or Thousand Palms, 29 Palms, out in the deserts here of Southern California. The names tell you, they're dominated by palm trees.
Yeah.
And those communities out in Palm Springs, Indio, Blythe, wherever, they're going to have these ornamental palms that these palm weevils will do just great in. And then, not far down the road, those commercial date growers are going to be looking at those dying palms going, oh, crikey, here we go. It's
Yeah.
only a matter of time now before this thing starts hammering away at our palm trees. And, we've had records and confirmed kills of date-producing palm trees, Phoenix dactylifera, which are grown ornamentally in these urban areas, having been killed by the South American palm weevil. So we know that they can do this. But what I found very interesting about these date palm kills is that these palm trees have been killed in two different ways. The palm weevil gets into the top of the crown and kills it like we see with Phoenix canariensis, the Canary Island date palm. But we've recently been getting reports where the females have now started to lay their eggs on the trunks of these date palms. We've never seen that with the Canary Island date palms. And the weevil larvae have gone into the trunk where there's no meristematic tissue, and they've started tunneling up the trunks, creating huge bleeding, seeping wounds on these trees. And, the response has been to treat them with with systemic insecticides to try and rid the infestations that are going up the insides of these palms. And this is something we've seen in the Middle East as well, with commercial date palm producing areas. But where I have seen the trunks attacked most heavily on these edible date palms has often been areas where they have started to produce these pups, these small offshoots that start coming up from the base of the palm tree. So there's obviously meristematic activity there, and the palm weevils have gone into there. And then the way the Saudis deal with this is that they'll cut those infested pups off, or these offshoots. Then they take like a big tool that you'd use for cracking concrete, one of these big bars with a spade type end on it and a spike at the other end. And they will just chisel all of that infected material out of the base of the trunk of the palm. And one guy actually had a bag of mortar with him. He just made up like the cement mix and just like packed the hole,
Huh.
to fill in the hole because it won't grow back.
Yeah.
There's no meristematic tissue. All the activity's in the top of the palm, but once they've chiseled out all that stuff, there's a big hole in the palm tree, so they just packed it full of cement. And that was the way they got rid of those weevil larvae that were starting to tunnel into the base of the trunk. Just scoop it out and then pack it full of cement. Crazy. But it's the types of things you learn when you actually go to these places and work with these guys for a few days to see, how do they go about finding the palm weevils? Okay, they've found them now. How are you going to deal with it? And you see the guy pull out like the big concrete smashing thing that, you can ram it up and down to break small bits of pavement. And then, you put the pointy end underneath the pavement, push it through the soil to lift up the piece of smashed concrete. Well, they just use that to like dig palm weevils out of the trunks of these trees. A bag of mortar and just pack in the hole and you're done.
Stuff that would mortify somebody like dealing with a deciduous tree here in the Midwest.
Right. Good pun there. Mortar and mortify.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even do it on purpose.
Want to keep up with the latest integrated pest management research? Check out the North Central IPM Center's Pests in Progress webinar. Listen real time or check out the expanding library of past recorded webinars and keep up to speed.
You mentioned, Mark, like the primary way that people are dealing with this thing is to use systemic insecticides, and then obviously the secondary method of kind of chiseling the insect out from the tree itself. Is it different if somebody's running like a date palm operation? You mentioned like you're going to be on the treadmill if you're doing systemic insecticides. I think people here in the Midwest have definitely heard about that in the form of the emerald ash borer. If you have an ash tree that you're trying to keep alive, the treadmill is, I think, less frequent. I think every 2 or 3 years you're treating with a systemic insecticide for that. But you get the picture. But is it different if somebody is commercially producing date palms? Like, because I imagine it would be cost prohibitive for somebody with a lot of palm trees to prophylactically treat a bunch of palm trees and try in order to keep them alive. But maybe not. Maybe I'm underestimating the value of the date palms and the cost of the insecticides. What's going on there?
Yeah, so no, it's a very good question. So these insecticides are expensive to apply. Obviously, you got to put on the right amount of product, the right concentration, then there's a translocation period, then there's a residual period of activity, then all that stuff disappears and you have to start again. So that's the issue that they're facing in these ornamental palms in urban areas. You're basically on a treadmill 2 to 3 times a year, treat the palms on a calendar cycle. Now, with the date industry here in California, and I think it's true for the Middle East too, you just can't keep loading up these palms with these insecticides. There is some concern that the material may end up in the fruit. The fruit's a sink, and it's probably going to pull at least some amount of this insecticide into the product. And if, your fruit have trace elements of the insecticides, it's probably going to throw up a red flag, and you're going to have difficulty selling your product. So how do we deal with this? So when we were in Saudi Arabia working on this, yes, some insecticides were used. I think they're pretty much all contact insecticides sprayed to the crown of the tree when there were no flowers or fruit developing. So any curious weevils find the palms, pick up a lethal dose of insecticide, fall on the ground and die. Trees that are infested, that cannot be saved, they're cut down and destroyed. The palm processing facilities, at least in Al-Hasa, where we were mind-blowing. They had these huge grinding machines, big conveyor belt. You could put an entire palm tree on, and it would just move through the grinder and get spewed out the other end. And they had hectares of ground up palm that was like composting in the sun. So all the life stages, if anything survived being ground, seemed highly unlikely, would then be incinerated basically in the baking hot sun.
Sure.
And then the final part of the program is that, as I mentioned earlier, the male weevils produce an aggregation pheromone. We know what those chemicals are. They're commercially available. They're relatively easy to synthesize, which makes them somewhat cheap to buy. So you can put the pheromones, a capsule of the pheromone inside a trap. Often we use a bucket that has some holes drilled in it. And then the pheromone dangles from the lid of the bucket. And the bucket's made of plastic. It's too smooth for the weevils to walk on. So typically we'd wrap that in burlap. So it provides a bit of a rough surface for the weevils to walk up. Go in through the hole, attracted by the pheromone. But they also need that fermenting bait. You may remember we talked about that very characteristic odor that comes out of these palm trees that are being attacked by weevils. So a lot of work has shown that the pheromone, while it's attractive in itself, you can sort of like amplify that attractiveness if the pheromone is also coupled with fermenting bait. And fermenting bait consists of some type of fruit. So, for example, when we were in Mexico or South America, we use sugarcane. Saudi Arabia, they have an excess of dates. So dates go into the pot, and you mix with that some water, and then the natural yeasts on those dates begin fermenting. And so that combination of pheromone, fermenting bait, then draws in the weevils. They go in the holes. There'll be some sort of liquid in the trap. We use antifreeze because it doesn't evaporate quickly, and they just fall in there and they drown. So in California, I was kind of curious about this. What's the role of these yeasts? You can buy different types of yeast, right? Baker's yeast. You can get different types of yeast for making wine, beer, that type of thing. So we ran some field trials looking at whether or not yeasts actually had an impact on the attractiveness of the fermenting bait. To my surprise, they did. And I was expecting wine yeasts that are advertised as having a fresh, fruity flavor.
Yeah.
Would be super attractive to palm weevils. Oh, man, this is going to be a killer. We can get our fermenting bait out there, dates in a yogurt container of water with a perforated lid, so the volatiles, some water can escape through the perforated lid, put the water in there, and I put in my wine yeast. Now, I'm sure that's going to be far superior to bread yeast or those beer yeast that you can buy. Well, amazingly, the baker's yeast by far was the best, and it was the cheapest you could buy as well. And it worked really, really well. So the statistical analyses on there were super clear, but we did them anyway, probably not necessary. But baker's yeast really jumpstarts that fermentation process, and then it really does increase the capture rates. And look, even I can smell it. It smells like... So I was joking with some of the guys about this at a meeting. It's like, yeah, this is probably the type of beer the pharaohs were making way back in the day in ancient Egypt, right? You get some, I don't know, some dates from the palm tree, maybe somebody's baking up some bread and you've got some whatever lying around and you jumpstart all that. And yeah, so you've got some sort of like pharaoh beer basically fermenting away in these weevil traps. So yeah, that whole process is really important. So trapping programs in Saudi Arabia are important for managing the palm weevil, but they also supply you data on where the weevils are in these big plantations. What are the densities like over the course of the year? And we were able to use those data to help develop integrated pest management plans for the Saudis, because a big part of their program was just way too reliant on insecticides, and they were beginning to see resistance to some of these insecticides.
Sure.
And what for me was a very instructive lesson here was that I got lists of insecticides used by the growers, and it was all in Arabic, and I couldn't read it, but we were working with a guy from Sudan, Hamatu Al-Shafei, excellent English, obviously speaks Arabic. I gave him these lists, and I said, Hamatu, can you translate these for me, get the product names? So we got the product names. Then we looked up the active ingredients in them. I think this is a fundamental problem a lot of folks have, and hopefully it's not so bad in the States because we have pretty good grower education here. But these growers were convinced that they had an awesome insecticide rotation program going. So they're using like 6 to 8 different insecticides. And I said, okay. So yeah, sure, they all had different names, but they basically all had the same active ingredient.
Yeah.
So they were rotating the same insecticide, thinking they had an insecticide rotation program going, but they were just basically rotating names, not active ingredients. So this, I think, was a rather important finding that we were able to pass back to the growers to try and get them off this overuse of these, what was it? It's either a pyrethroid or a carbamate. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, it was overuse of one active ingredient. And then, with the trapping programs, the providing the information on where the weevils are, maybe you can spot treat those palms, maybe intensify the trapping, because the more traps you put out, the more weevils you catch, but then it becomes expensive to run a lot of traps. So traps can tell you where the activity is, how intense that activity is, and if you need to intensify trapping in those areas, you can do it. So down in, say, Central America, for example, Costa Rica, where they have a large oil palm industry, they basically trap weevils to the point where they're not such a big problem for them. So they can pretty much manage South American palm weevil in these oil palm plantations through these trapping programs. So just to take that one step further, some of your listeners may have heard about, this process called attract and kill, where you can use the pheromone to lure the insect to some bait, and that bait is loaded with insecticide.
Gotcha.
So a lot of folks that are listening to this may be familiar with attracting. A yellow sticky card is attract and kill, right? The insect is attracted to the color yellow, and then it gets stuck in the glue and it can't move. Well, how about putting a piece of cheese on a mouse trap? The mouse or rat comes in to eat the cheese and it gets killed when the trap's set.
Sure.
So with palm weevils, you can use attract and kill. And in this instance, there is a waxy material. We refer to that as the matrix. And that matrix is infused with insecticide and the pheromone. And the insecticide is a contact insecticide. It's a synthetic pyrethroid. We use it at a concentration of around 3 to 5%. And it has a pheromone in there. And the companies produce this in tubes that you insert into a caulking gun. So you can just walk around just putting dollops of this stuff, on rocks, fence posts,
oh, wow.
Posts, light posts and that sort of thing. And the weevils are curious. They smell something. It doesn't have the fermenting bait, but it's still sufficient for them to get curious as to what is it? So as always, I'm skeptical of this stuff. That won't work. Blah. So anyway, we set up a large room here on campus in the insectary facility, and we put out a dollop of this material, and we have video cameras around it, and then we just put weevils in the room. And those weevils, the males and females, are attracted to the aggregation pheromone, which makes it more powerful than a sex pheromone that you use for moths, because only males respond to that.
Sure.
So you can take out a lot of males, and if you can take out enough males, reproductive success drops, and then population growth drops, because females aren't getting mated and they can't lay fertilized eggs to keep the population going. And then hopefully the level of suppression is great enough that you reduce economic damage in crops. So codling moths, as I mentioned before, is one where pheromones have been used to, prevent males from finding females using sex pheromone. So the aggregation pheromone these weevils produces is attractive to males and females. So we'd put males and females in this room. They're black. We'd take some white out, put different marks on their backs, on their elytra, the wing cases, so we could see who these different ones are. And then the video would just Raspberry Pi camera that we set up over the dollop would record. Who walked over the dollop? What time of day did they walk over the dollop? How long did they spend interacting with the dollop? How often did they go back and forth across the dollop? How long? So we were able to figure out all of this stuff from those videos. And yes, they are attracted to the dollops that have the pheromone insect. Yes, the adult weevils will walk over, and yes, they will die.
Yeah.
So going into the room the next morning and seeing all these bodies all over the floor is absolutely amazing. So I was like, okay, let's look at the video. How long do these weevils need to touch the dollops for? They only need to pass over it once, twice. 3 seconds on average of interaction was sufficient to give them a lethal dose.
Wow.
But what was even more interesting to me was that weevils that we did not see on the video touching the dollop, they also died.
Just from being in the room?
No, I think it was horizontal transfer where males who touched the dollop then tried mating with a female. And since he had some of the insecticide on his sternum, on the underside of the body, when he climbed on top of her, he would rub that material on top of her as well. So she would end up dying. So you can get this weevil-to-weevil transfer, so you can either be killed directly, or if a weevil's got a lethal dose and has enough strength to get up into the palm tree, it may end up contaminating weevils that are up there as well. Okay, right. Well, does this do anything in the field? It works in a small lab. The video says it works. So we set up these quarter square mile plots down in San Diego County. We had 12 of them. So some plots didn't get any attract and kill. Then we put out other plots where we had, say, 40 of these dollops per quarter square mile, 100 and 250 dollops. You know, what's the magic number of dollops? And do dollops do anything in the field anyway?
Yeah.
So we were using the traps to see how many weevils we would capture in these treatment plots. And the control weevils went nuts, just a big explosion of population growth, and caught hundreds of those. And then as we get towards the end of the year, the control plot got no trend. They just, tumbled down as we move towards winter. So you see a big surge up in spring, peak high in summer. Then from summer down through fall, early winter, the weevil numbers drop off. They're just responding to the environmental cues of shortening day lengths and cooler temperatures here. Yep, so 40 dollops, yeah, you see a reduction in weevil numbers, but not that great. 100 dollops, yeah, you see a big reduction in weevils in the traps. And 250 dollops, you saw about the same number of weevils in traps as you did with 100 dollops, suggesting that there's a diminishing returns here. Putting out more dollops wasn't necessarily going to increase the kill.
Sure.
Or at least traps shut down the numbers of weevils we're catching in traps. So from there we decide, okay, maybe 125 dollops, the midpoint between 100 and 250 dollops, there's the sweet spot.
Sure.
All right, so let's test 125 dollops now. And then I was thinking, well, there's two things in that dollop, right? There's the insecticide and the pheromone.
Right.
And
Oh,
we already know that pheromone confusion has been used to control pest moths, for example. And I keep going back to codling moth because it's a really well-studied system. If you put out a lot of the codling moth sex pheromone, you get good population control of codling moth because males can't find the females to mate with and the populations go down. So now I'm wondering okay, so what are we dealing with here? Is it really attract and kill, or have we just sort of inadvertently run a big pheromone confusion program?
Yeah.
So we repeated those studies with $125. So we had quarter square mile plots with nothing, the control like we did before. Quarter square mile plots with attract and kill, which were dollops with insecticide and pheromone. And then we just had plots with pheromone only. So the control does its same thing like we saw previously, goes up in spring, peaks in summer, goes down again. As soon as we put out the dollops in these treatment areas, weevil activity or weevil captures in traps drops almost immediately. The following month, there's just an almost immediate drop. And it is immediate. Like at the start of the experiment, all those treatment numbers are about statistically the same. They're tracking the same.
Yeah.
We apply the treatments, the controls still go up, and then the treated plots numbers go down. Well, for the attract and kill and the pheromone only, the lines, population graphs were exactly the same, suggesting that the insecticide has no added benefit. It's pheromone confusion that is preventing the weevils from finding the pheromone-laden traps that have the fermenting bait in them, and that's why we catch fewer weevils in our monitoring traps. So this is great news for us because it means that if the weevil ends up in these date plantations, and because dates are such a small specialty crop in California, you've got almost no insecticides registered, and even if they did, they may not be able to put them on at the frequency needed to control the weevil because you can contaminate the fruit. Our results that we've been doing in these urban areas suggest that if the weevil ends up in these date growing gardens, you may be able to run a pheromone confusion program to manage the weevil, and you won't have to treat any palms with insecticides. So this brings me to another important point about a lot of this agricultural work I do in California. Yeah. I'm a biological control specialist. All I've been talking about is insecticides and IPM programs for palm weevils. But that's not what I'm trained to do. But nobody else is doing it, so I've had to step up and do it, and I like doing it, and I think we've done a good job. But anyway, look, Southern California is heavily urbanized.
Yep.
Almost all of our invasive agricultural pests established in people's backyards first.
Yep.
So for me, our front line to protect our agricultural industries, whether it be avocados, grapes, dates, or whatever, is that we need to proactively develop these management programs for these target pests while they are contained in these urban areas. So we did this with Asian citrus psyllid, where the biological control program in people's backyards worked spectacularly well, suppressed populations by 75 to 80%. And as a consequence, those outrageously high populations in people's gardens that we were counting prior to the release of that parasitoid from Pakistan did not escape into these commercial citrus production areas. Therefore, mainly, the disease that psyllid spreads, Huanglong Bing, it's a bacterium that lives in the trees. It's also here in urban areas in Southern California. It has not made it into commercial zones because densities of psyllids were reduced so heavily that vector pressure dropped, and then the incidence of disease or the pathogen being moved from infected urban trees out into these agricultural areas dropped precipitously as well. So that was another benefit of controlling Asian citrus psyllid, was it substantially reduced transmission risk of these bacteria, Candidatus liberibacter asiaticus, out into commercial zones. Also, the pressure coming from urban areas of the psyllids themselves, I can think of them as flying syringes. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts, and they're full of bacteria.
Yeah.
You got like a flying syringe that's just looking for a plant to like feed on, right, and inject the bacteria into it. Well, that risk has been substantially reduced. So now with the work that we've done with South American palm weevil, again, an agricultural pest that we have been dealing with in the urban area to proactively develop management plans prior to the anticipated establishment of this pest in these date-growing areas, I think we've got a very strong program figured out based on studies we've been doing in people's backyards, in parks and golf courses. So, I can't emphasize, look, and I'm sure a lot of you guys realize this, when we have an invasive pest problem, just let me give you an example. Spotted lanternfly. That should probably be on everybody's radar right now.
Yep.
So it's not here in California. It's established in Pennsylvania. It's gone up and down the Atlantic seaboard. It's now creeping its way through the Midwest. I think it's at least in Indiana now. It's probably gone further than that. So here we are in California. Look, with huge grape industry, huge palm fruit industries, big nut industries. Looking at the spotted lanternfly like creeping its way towards us over here. It's like, we've seen this lots of times. We just sit around just waiting for it to show up. And it's like, it's finally here. Oh, now it's crisis time. Populations have exploded and it's spreading rapidly all up and down the place, causing immense amount of economic damage or in some case ecological damage as well. It's like, okay, that's right. Let's start doing something now.
Yeah.
After it's here. We're reactive. We're dealing with it now. So I've been pushing this idea here, which has got some traction now, is that for these obvious threats, why don't we proactively get ahead of the problem? And the California Department of Food and Agriculture has a proactive biological control and IPM program where we start working on these probable invasive pests before they actually get here.
Interesting.
And we've done that for spotted lanternfly.
Oh.
So we've screened natural enemies for spotted lanternfly. We have a very good idea, I think, of what's going to work and what's not going to work when spotted lanternfly finally lands here in California. There's been a lot of border inceptions of this thing coming in on firewood and artistic sculptures that have been moved in from the East Coast into California. The border inspection folks have picked those up and destroyed them. But you got to wonder, how many have sneaked through that didn't get picked up. Right. And it's probably just a matter of time before somebody's barbecue or their RV that has these egg masses on it's parked up in, I don't know, Southern California, maybe up in Napa or Sonoma counties where all the wine grapes are grown. And those eggs hatch and the spotted lanternfly finds a suitable host plant right next to that RV, barbecue, child's playground material that's been brought over, and boom, that's it. You got it. And then it blows up and it's like, well, now it's time to do something. Well, actually, we're actually done it now. It's not here yet. It hasn't established here yet, but we have a lot of information on how California should best respond to that problem. So sort of playing that proactive approach out is that my role now, I feel like, is I protect agriculture in California by dealing with these agricultural pests while they're still contained in the urban areas. And we always get these pests in the urban areas first. People have smuggled in plants, they've smuggled in cuttings, they've smuggled in fruit. It's always in somebody's backyard first.
Sure.
And then it spreads out of there, and then we have an agricultural crisis to deal with. So my new philosophy is, and you know what? I learned this from Asian citrus psyllid. Asian citrus psyllid, well established in Florida, doing tons of damage. Got into Texas, tons of damage. It's in Mexico doing tons of damage. It's like California, massive citrus industry. We didn't do anything. And then it shows up in San Diego County, in LA County. It's like, oh, it's here. And I'm thinking, you know what? It was obvious it was going to come here at some stage. Why didn't I do all this work in Pakistan like 5-6 years ago?
Yeah.
And had all the pieces organized.
Yeah.
Because by the time it took me to do anything, it was basically 5 years had gone. By the time I made all the arrangements in Pakistan, we got the natural enemies back to the quarantine facility. We did all the safety testing for those natural enemies, prepared the environment assessment reports for review by the North American Plant Protection Organization and USDA APHIS. All this takes time.
Yeah.
And while we're doing all that stuff, the pest is spreading and the populations are growing. And so I learned a valuable lesson from that. And I should have been more attuned to the risk and should have had something already on the back burner ready to go. So after that, I talked to some somewhat influential people up the California Department of Food and Ag and say, look, Asian citrus psyllid is not going to be the last obvious threat that's going to come in here and potentially have a huge devastating impact on, like a citrus industry in California is worth about $3 billion. That's just the fruit. I mean, that's just a mind-blowing amount of money, right? That's got nothing to do with like all the extra activities that are associated with that $3 billion. Some estimates by these agricultural economists suggest that the citrus industry, after all the add-ons, could be closer to $7 billion a year of money that's brought up in California. You think of nuts, grapes.
Yeah.
These are multi-billion-dollar industries too. So yeah, we should be looking forward and getting prepared for the obvious stuff that's coming. And there's always going to be wild cards, right? Things that you just don't know about that just appear. And I've had to deal with this in avocados where we've had pests show up here in urban areas, really hammering away at our avocados, but they're undescribed species.
Right.
So that goes back to the Indiana Jones thing again. Gosh. It's like, where do I even go to start finding these things? Yeah. So I have to enlist the help of taxonomists. We do all these massive field collections through suspected areas of origin, collect up all this material, get the morphology and taxonomy done, get the species names done, do all the DNA and molecular analyses, and then start comparing DNA fingerprints. And a couple of times we have actually, at least with the avocado pest, we did it with the weevil from Bali, the Indonesian, we can pretty much figure out where they have come from. And once you know that, you can figure out how they came to California, if you know within the area of origin, like Mexico. I mean, that's a vast area.
Sure.
But if you know one particular area or town where you were fortunate enough to sample and you actually got almost the identical genetic fingerprint of the pest in its home range, which matches the same population that's here, the invasive one that's in California, I mean, that is just eye-opening. So let me give you an example of that.
Sure.
We had something here called avocado lacebug, chewing up the leaves of avocados. It's like it's first established in San Diego County. It's close to Mexico border, right? Backyard trees again, big threat to the agricultural. I think avocados are worth about $320 million a year to the state. Okay, right. Okay, so avocado lacebug, yes, is known from the Caribbean. It's also known from Florida, parts of Mexico, South America, Central America. So go around all those areas, gather up all the lace bugs. So I'm driving up the Pacific coast of Mexico, and I come to a border. Basically, it's a toll road. There's bathrooms there, so I get out and yes, I can have something to eat, go to the toilet, that sort of stuff, wander around. The little trestle table, a lady selling baby avocado plants potted up in little black polyethylene bags.
Yeah.
So I look at those. Oh, hell, look at that. There's lace bugs. I collect a bunch of them from Las Vivosis in the state of Nayarit. I bring them back to California and we do the DNA. They were an exact match to the populations that established here in California. And what I think had happened was somebody from San Diego had been down in Mexico in their RV, stopped at probably exactly the same toll road pit stop place where I stopped, saw the baby avocados and go, oh, honey, the best guacamole we've ever had in our lives has been down here in Mexico. We should buy a couple of these plants and put them in the garden at home. Put them in the RV, drive back up, I was 1,000 miles or something on their big RV tour through that part of Mexico. People do this all the time. You see a lot of California plates on RVs all up and down the Pacific coast of Mexico. Get home, got their little plants that they've smuggled in. They probably lied at the border saying, no, they've got nothing to declare. Come through, they get waved through. And look, if you're going to go to all that trouble to sneak in a plant, you're going to do your utmost to keep it alive. And by keeping it alive, obviously you're keeping the pest alive too, because it's still happily feeding on that plant. And that's how you end up with these infestations. Carefully looked after smuggled plants that are infested with bugs that we don't want here. And then once they blow up in your backyard, well, it's a good possibility your neighbor, you the next door, a couple of houses down, also has an avocado. Just like with citrus, just about everybody has citrus here. So for them to spread rapidly through these urban environments, it's really simple. And again, we're growing these. This is what just think of this. Let's go back to this Asian citrus psyllid thing, right? We're growing citrus here, a tree that's not native, probably Asian is, I think, the area of origin for that tree. We're growing it in a desert where typically there's no water. Now we're watering a tree from Asia. And then we've got all these bugs that feed on citrus that have come from all around the world. Asia, Europe, parts of Africa, Australia. I mean, we've created these bizarre accumulations of these insects on crop plants, non-native crop plants growing in areas where they would never survive unless we created, the conditions necessary for them to thrive in. And then they're all clonal. They're all flowering and setting fruit and flushing at the same time. So you just created these amazing conditions for these insect pests.
Are you interested in reading the latest integrated pest management updates such as current pest concerns, management tips, research updates, available IPM resources, upcoming events, and job announcements? Make sure you subscribe to the monthly newsletter, The Central Issue, published by the North Central IPM Center.
The unintended consequences, somebody just yesterday was... they quoted the movie Jurassic Park and that life finds a way.
Yeah.
Same thing here.
Exactly.
Mark.
Yeah.
Before I want to transition us into kind of the wrap-up questions I like to ask at the end. But I had a couple of thoughts before we got there, and one of them was, is your lab working on, with regards to the South American palm weevil, is there a biological control aspect to this as well?
Yes, there is.
Go for it.
This is pretty exciting for me. So in the literature out of Brazil, scientific literature published out of Brazil, there's 2 papers on a parasitic fly that attacks the larvae and pupae of the weevil. And this is in an area in northeastern Brazil. And nobody's really done anything on that fly. So, fortunately for me, a couple of years ago, I had a entomologist from Brazil contact me, say, hey, I'd like to come and do 12 months in your lab. I said, yeah, sure, George, that would be great. Why don't you come up here? So he's a great guy. We got on really well. At that time, I had an undergraduate student, Gabby, working in the lab as well, helping out with various projects in the lab. Her dad is from Brazil, and she speaks fluent Portuguese and Spanish and got on well with George. So she finished her undergraduate work here and said, I'm thinking of going to graduate school. Well, any suggestions? I said, yeah, you should go to Brazil. Go work with George. You got on well with him and, spend some time down and, learn about your heritage and culture from Brazil. So she thought about it for a while and said, okay, yeah, I think I'm going to go. So she got hold of George, moved down there. And she's been working on the parasitic fly for us. So again, this gets back to your connections, that we talked about
Yeah.
right at the beginning. So if Gabby hadn't been in the lab, if she hadn't been interested in the entomology, she didn't have a connection to Brazil, and if George hadn't been here visiting from Brazil, this never would have happened. So she's working on the behavior and the biology of the fly for her master's degree in Brazil, and we're making inroads into being able to rear the fly. We are doing stuff with that fly nobody in the world has ever done before. Nobody's tried to breed the fly before.
Sure.
So when I went down a couple of years ago with George before Gabby joined his lab down there, we figured out where we needed to go. So this was great, man. So George wanted to fly to these places. Go, no, man, we're going to go in the car. I want to drive all over this place and check it out. So all those crazy road stories, and we don't have time for a lot of that stuff. So anyway, we get into these areas where we need to go and look for these flies in these oil palms. Show up at an oil palm plantation. George, talks to one of the foremen there. Yes, they actually have a guy whose whole job is to walk around those big plantations with a chainsaw, cutting down dying palms and getting rid of the palm weevils that are in them. All right, so we find this guy, say, can we hire him for half a day? He can come out with us and we'll find some palms, cut them down. Man, this guy's amazing with the chainsaw. He can drop these big palms and then you slice up the tops of them. This guy was like watching an artist do his thing. Take all the fronds off, cut the top off it, then dissect that cabbage head at the top, and it's full of palm weevil pupae. And I mean, it was just like, oh God, okay, that's great. And I said, George, you never find what you're looking for on the first time. We're going to be here for probably weeks looking for this thing. He goes, oh, Mark, here's my bad Brazilian accent. Oh, Mark, you're always so negative. Where are you going to? Good luck today. I can feel it. Yeah, right, George. So we gather up the first bunch of cocoons out of this palm. Okay. He cracks them open. Okay. They were full of fly pupae. Just that, oh my God, I just could not believe our luck on the first palm, on the first day. Within literally the first 45 minutes, we'd found exactly, these pupal cocoons of these are packed full of flies, 20 plus pupae. So you kill one weevil, you get 20 flies. I mean, that's an awesome natural enemy ratio, right?
Yeah.
You kill one pest and you get 20 natural enemies from it. So I'm all very excited and I'm like stacking up all these cocoons that have flies in them. We're cracking them open, making sure there's cocoons in there, and I'm putting them on top of the palm trunk that we've just cut, so it's freshly cut. It's a nice table for us to put all our... And then out of nowhere, the adult flies start coming in from the surrounding palms and the jungle and that, landing on these pupal cocoons, just walking around, looking for things probably to parasitize.
Yeah.
So to me, that was like absolutely amazing, right? That whatever they are responding to, they can detect it from a significant distance it brought in several of these flies. It's like, wow. So they are probably very host specific to the palm and to the weevils, because whatever volatiles they were responding to, they're just not like we cut down an apple tree and suddenly these weevil flies started showing up on a cut apple tree, with some other pest, say the apple weevil or something, and we know that those flies don't respond, don't parasitize those, but whatever those cues were, they had really synced into those. So that gives me some optimism. So once she's figured out how to rear this fly in a box in the lab, we might be able to start colonies of the flies and the weevils here at UC Riverside in our quarantine facility. And, it's a possibility we might be able to run a biological control program targeting South American palm weevil. And if that happens and it is successful, I would wager that the folks in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East would be interested in that fly too, because I bet it probably attacks all species of Rhynchophorus larvae, whether or not it's ever evolved with them. I bet it's a specialist on Rhynchophorus larvae that live in palm trees, and it really doesn't care about the species. As long as it's the right genus and it's in the right palm, it's in the right host plant, it'll probably get nailed by this fly. So yeah, that could be an interesting, we'd call that new association biological control, if that pans out.
I'm assuming it doesn't always happen like that, Mark, where you show up and you find it within 45 minutes and you see these cues. You probably would have like a less interesting nickname, I bet, if it always happened like that.
Yeah.
But,
so I've been on some of these foreign exploration trips where we've been away for 2-3 weeks and we found the pest, but we have not found any natural enemies.
yeah.
The pressure and the anxiety over that is all the time. The money you've wasted, or money like you feel like you've wasted, you got nothing to show for it. And I remember on one of these whitefly trips, we were looking for parasites of giant whitefly. It was the second to last day of maybe a 2 to 3 week trip. We finally found the parasite, and we found a lot of them. And basically, we were on the plane the next day with our permits and the parasites coming back to the quarantine facility here. They did great in quarantine, did the safe testing, released them, and yes, they nailed giant whitefly. But that was one project that was right down to the wire. Yeah, very, very nerve-wracking and high levels of anxiety with when it's it's late in coming.
Sure.
It's like fly fishing, you're out there all day or most of the night, you've got nothing until you're just about to pack up and finally you nail it. And then sometimes you go out and on the first cast, you've hooked into a big one. So you never know.
It's funny. I myself am a fisherman as well. And when you said that, because I've been on a lot of fishing trips where, it has parallels to what you're saying, where you're out there, you've spent a lot of time and resources to get to a place to go and target a fish, and if it's not happening, it's really stressful. You're going, what am I doing with myself?
All that gear, you sussed everything out, the right flies, lures, whatever you're using. You think you should be nailing it, but nope.
There you go. If you're a fisherman,
not hitting it.
You know the feeling. With that, Mark, I kind of want to transition into getting these last few wrap-up questions that I have for you.
Let's do it.
Based on we've talked a lot about the South American palm weevil today, and I have learned so much. What would you say is the future for this insect pest in let's just say in California?
Yeah, so I think it's going to continue to spread slowly through San Diego County. At this point, there's no state or federal level desire to try and eradicate it. Sort of in two minds about that as to whether it's possible or not. I think we still would have a chance of eradicating it if enough money and effort was thrown at it. It's very sensitive to the traps. It's very sensitive to the pheromone. And I think if we had a coordinated effort, since it's still located in a relatively small area but slowly expanding area of San Diego, we could probably nail it. But from there, it's probably going to sneak out and eventually get into these date-growing areas. Whether it gets there naturally, or, this is mind-blowing to me too, there are no quarantines on palm movement out of these weevil-infested areas. Try and wrap your mind around that. So there are nurseries in there that sell palm trees. I've seen weevil-killed palm trees in some of these nurseries. They eventually get taken out and destroyed and that. But you don't know it's infested until the palm's showing really obvious symptoms and it's on the point of death. So if people buy one of these and decide they're going to move it to wherever, it could be tens of miles away, hundreds of miles away. I don't know. People buy plants and they seem to move them all over the place.
Yeah.
You could end up with an infestation, some considerable distance from the epicenter of the problem we're dealing with right now. So that's something that's been talked about, and there's been no action at the state level to do anything about stopping these palm trees coming out of these infested areas. So you're just relying on the industry, I think, the nursery industry, to self-regulate, self-police itself, and just do the right thing. But then again, people can just lie to you and just say, I'm buying a palm tree and I'm moving it, 3 miles down the street. But really, they're moving it, maybe 150 miles up to Los Angeles. Who knows? So there's that. So I think we're just going to be dealing with a slow, I call it a chronic problem. It's just like a slow creeping issue that we're dealing with, and eventually we'll get out to the date industry areas. But like I emphasized before, I think we've already done a lot of good work proactively on developing management plans for the date growers while working on this pest, in urban areas, which sort of seems really counterintuitive, right? You're coming up with agricultural management plans by dealing with agricultural pest that's growing in living and thriving in somebody's backyard in a heavily urbanized area of Southern California.
My next one for you, Mark, is what as time goes on. I mean, I'm personally really heartened by the idea that, you're saying you're taking a proactive approach, like your example you gave with the spotted lanternfly. Given all that, what would you say? What do you think the future of the use of biological control agents looks like?
Yeah, so I think the future is probably about as good as it's going to get. And that's what we're dealing with now. So there is some support for biological control of invasive insects. Like a lot of these things, yes, there could be more. We could do more. We
Sure.
could train more students. We could have more grant support and all this sort of stuff. This is just a perennial problem, I think, that we all deal with in this industry. But the invasive insect problem that we deal with, they're not diminishing. A lot of big meta-analyses indicate, and we've done one too, that it's an accelerating problem. So the demand for this technology is going to increase over time. The diversity of the targets is going to increase. The areas of the world that they're coming from, it's going to increase. Tourism is still expanding into parts of the world that has not seen a lot of visitation from people. And you get all these like Instagrammers that are like, I'm the first person to go here. Blah, blah, blah. Look how awesome it is. And then next thing you know, there's like a huge mob of people going over to wherever this hottest new area is to hang out in. They go, oh, these are really pretty flowers. Look at this beautiful bush. Oh, this will grow great in my backyard. I'll just put some of that in my suitcase and I'll bring it home. It'll be a great memento from wherever I've been, right? So, and then that has its own set of challenges because, like I mentioned with some of the avocado pests that we've dealt with, these are probably undescribed, unknown species that suddenly pop up in a new part of the world and is causing big problems. It's like, oh, here we go again. We've got to figure out where it's come from. You've got to get it described, get all the DNA stuff done. You know nothing about its biology, behavior, and ecology. So all that fundamental work, you're going to have to do. And then the last part that I think that's going to help biological controls survive is that there's just growing regulation and resistance to insecticide use. And, and unfortunately, I guess I sort of say this too, is that there's also resistance to using, genetically modified or gene edited crop plants.
Sure.
Which, I think has immense potential to help us with a lot of issues, but we're just blind to those possibilities. And I think we're unrealistic in the fear that we have of using some of these, novel tools that could be really game changing for us. So I guess those are the major fronts. We're going to have continual pressure from invasive species coming in from wherever, and sometimes from places we've got no idea, and brand new species we've never seen before. We're going to have agricultural challenges with our food supply. We're going to have to do something about that. Whether or not insecticides, especially these neonicotinoids, there's been a lot of scrutiny of those, and whether or not they're going to be a major tool that we can use in agriculture. And then resistance to gene-edited or GMO-type crop plants. Yeah.
My last one, Mark, is I always do the same one at the end here. What would you want a member of the public to know about, in this case, like I guess you could go either way, about invasive insects or about the use of biological controls to control them? You pick.
Yeah. So I think both of those are intertwined, and I think my answer will address both of those. So I personally think a lot of people don't realize that their lives are impacted every day by invasive species. Whether it's the cost of the food that you're buying, the unavailability of that food, maybe there's quarantines restricting that food, maybe there's insecticide residues on that food. You're just not aware of what the issue is that has led to that particular situation. And in some instances, it can be an invasive insect pest. And then coupled with that, and I think this is especially true for people here in Southern California who have citrus trees. They don't know anything about the work we've done on Asian citrus psyllid and the work we did in Pakistan and the parasites that are now in their backyards killing those psyllids. And they've benefited directly from public good science. which is paid for with our tax money. So we have thriving backyard citrus where people can still pick oranges, lemons, tangerines, grapefruit, limes from trees that are surviving because Christina and I went to Pakistan, spent a lot of time over there, brought the natural enemies back. They established and spread quickly. The disease, Huanglong Bing, present in Southern California, it's not going to be an issue, at least in my opinion. And if it does become an issue, I will be retired by that time. But it's already been close to 18 years or something, I think, now that we've been dealing with all of this. And if it was going to happen, it would have happened by now.
Sure.
I mean, the rate of spread and the disaster that was caused in Florida was extremely quick with relation to the spread of the psyllid and then the manifestation of the disease and then basically the collapse of their citrus industry. We haven't seen that in California. I think after all this time, it's just not going to happen. I'm not a betting person, but this is something I would be willing to bet on. I feel quite confident about that. So I think it's the anonymity of the work that we do and the public good benefit that comes from it, and that most people have no idea that this work's going on behind the scenes, and it's making sure that we talk a lot about food security, right? And I think often we think of food security in the terms of, agricultural production, which is obviously very important. But there's also a lot of food security issues around what you grow in your backyard. You may not need it to survive, but you certainly get a lot of enjoyment of picking your own fruits and vegetables from your garden that you've grown yourself, eating them yourself, sharing them with your neighbors, friends, relatives. So, I think the two are closely entwined.
And in essence, Mark, that encapsulates like the goal of this podcast as well, I'd say, is the idea that there's all this work being done by folks like yourself, not just in biological controls, obviously, but on insect pests and diseases that I want people to know about. And, I'd lump myself into the public right there as far as not knowing about, the Asian psyllid. Not that we have a lot of citrus here in Iowa, but, there's cases like this all over the place. And I think at minimum, I agree with you 100%. People should just know that there's somebody doing a pretty, I'm not going to say an entirely thankless job, but an anonymous job such as yourself.
Yeah. Well, a really good example for you guys is emerald ash borer and
right.
the fantastic parasitoids that have been imported in from China. And where they have established, it appears that they've really knocked emerald ash borer back. And I was just talking to some of these guys last weekend who've been working on this. There's recovery now of those ash forests. And trees that have been killed have suckered in some areas, and it looks like that regrowth is escaping attack from emerald ash borer because the parasitoids that attack the eggs, larvae, and pupae of that pest seem to have established and done a really good job. It's taken a long time because the life cycle of emerald ash borer is relatively long, right? I think it's an annual insect, so therefore it's going to take a while for these natural enemies to build up, but they seem to be tracking the pest and providing levels of control that may indeed not only allow the ash trees to recover, but maintain the structure of those ash-dominant forests, which I think is really important as well.
I'm going to have to get some names from you.
Oh, yeah, I can supply those for you, definitely. It might be hard to track down right now, given the government shutdown.
Sure.
We were all around hiking out in the mountains last weekend together. That's how I got the updates.
Gotcha. Well, Mark, with that, I like to leave time here at the end where I'm going to stop asking you questions. You can make any acknowledgments, point people to any resources you want them to know about. You got the floor.
All right. So, I'm an entomologist at the University of California, Riverside. We have a website up, www.biocontrol.ucr.edu. And I'm also the director for the Center for Invasive Species Research, and we have a website up there too, www.cisr.ucr.edu. So, anybody else wants me to do these types of interviews with them, as an extension specialist here at UC Riverside, I take that side of my job very importantly, and that's why I responded almost instantly to Ed's invitation to be part of this podcast. I think it is really important that we get out of somebody told me, you live in the ivory tower on campus. And I guess, well, I'm not sure if that's really true, but I can see why a lot of people think that. And, I refer to myself as a pragmatic, blue-collared entomologist. I work on problems that impact homeowners and agricultural industries. So, yeah, I am pretty devoted to that pragmatism of the work that we do.
Well, I'm glad for the work, and I am glad for your willingness to come on here and talk to me, Mark. I can definitely see myself calling on you again sometime in the future. This has been a blast.
So. I might have shared all my stories. Might have not much left to tell you, but thanks. This has been great, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and share our experiences with your listeners.
Excellent. With that, folks, I hope you really enjoyed this one as much as I did, and I hope you keep listening, and I'll see you next time.
I See Dead Plants bridges the gap between plant science research and the impact it has on our daily lives. It is brought to you by the Crop Protection Network and the North Central Integrated Pest Management Center, which are both partially supported by the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. For more information on today's topic or other pest management issues, check out our show notes, cropprotectionnetwork.org or ncipmc.org. Remember, this information is for entertainment purposes only. The statements made in this podcast should be interpreted within the limited context of the particular topics being discussed. Contact your state extension program for local information on pest management. For the full non-discrimination statement or for accommodation inquiries, go to cropprotectionnetwork.org/about. Music written and recorded by fellow plant pathologist Sean Toporek. Thank you for listening to I See Dead Plants.